Thank you everyone for joining. Today I'm excited to be holding this chat with Kevin Mooney of UiPath and talking about RPA and cybersecurity. My name is Ahmed Zaidi. I'm your host today. I'm the Chief Automation Officer and CEO here at Accelirate. We are a diamond partner of UiPath. We've been partners with UiPath. Kevin, I don't know if you know it yet, but you might not have joined. 2017 is when we partnered with UiPath when your first partner manager, US partner manager arrived, and you hired them, about 3 people in the US. We've both grown since then. It's been a very fruitful partnership. We really appreciate it. Kevin, if you want to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ahmed. So my name is Kevin Mooney. You're right. You predate me at UiPath by just a little bit. So I've been with UiPath around 3.5 years, focusing on security. And I'm the global security and compliance lead for UiPath. It essentially means that I handle all of the security questions, concerns from all of our customers and partners across all of our product areas and around the globe.
Perfect. So, look, if from the audience, if you made it to this thing today, I am very, very, very certain that you already know what RPA is and you want to hear about what the security concerns might be. But for those 3 people who might not have heard about what RPA is so far, the RPA automation is software that makes it easy to build, deploy, manage robots, and robots emulate human actions. They interact with various systems, and it's a platform for process automation. I know this might look like a trivial thing, but if you've ever used it, and it's UiPath product, and makes it look easy, but it's a lot of moving parts underneath. Interestingly, software emulating humans is not new. It's been done before. This type of test automation and even in 3270 emulators, that type of automation has been around. What's different this time around with RPA is that it's managed and it's enterprise scaled, centrally managed and governed. So the beauty with robots is not only can they mimic human actions like clicking and seeing what's on screen, but it's software, so it can also access interfaces to applications and systems that humans might not be able to. For example, APIs and other forms of SDKs and web service calls and things like that humans may not be able to do. But that's in a nutshell RPA. If you are really interested, if you don't know what it is, go to uipath.com, go to our website, and there's tons of material on what it is and how it works. But I think one of the big things that we've been seeing with folks who've been adopting RPA, especially those in the IT space who it's being introduced to, I think it's very common for them to compare it to usual applications and automation application platforms. But I think what we feel is showing the architecture of the system opens it up to the discussion of what the various components of a RPA platform are, and where data sits on and so forth. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a on-prem implementation of RPA platform. This is UiPath specific. So in the middle, you see UiPath server components. On the middle and the right-hand side, these are all server components for various parts of the platform, which manages. On the left-hand side, you see here in green, these are robots. What's interestingly unique about RPA platforms, and it's going to change soon, but is that all execution of processes happens on these agent machines. Now, these agent machines are generally running the same OS as end users, except that they are virtualized either in the cloud or in a virtual platform internally to the organization, something like a VMware or a Citrix virtualization platform, right? So that's slightly different than when people think about the actual execution of work which happens on a server. this may be, you can liken this to distributed computing. However, there's these agents that work on various on machines that are managed and communicate their status back to the server component. That's really kind of a uniqueness within within the RPA paradigm that I feel is fairly different from the traditional app dev architectures that you may be used to. You open up a port from a server to go out to do to another application. You make a route from one server to another to call an API, or to you give it access to various file shares to be able to do something. There's this layer of agent that sits in between the server components of the platform and the applications that you may already have internally. So I feel that it's important for people to understand what the architectures look like. And this is the same thing in the cloud. Again, one of the interesting things, and Kevin, I'd love for your opinion on it. I talk to folks a lot and they go, hey, I have bought the cloud. I don't need any in-house infrastructure or security reviews or architecture reviews for any in-house architecture and infrastructure. And then we have to tell them, yes, there are these agents that do sit internally. There are, of course, even if you're in the cloud, the execution happens on a machine. You've bought a manager. That infrastructure still needs to be provisioned. Now, UiPath does provide a cloud service where they would be able to provide you this these VMs, but it's that's something to be thought of. Kevin, have you seen a lot of folks struggle with having to provision internal infrastructure even though they bought some cloud platform?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, we often think about it like you're hiring a digital worker when you're, you know, deploying a robot. And just like hiring an actual worker, you have to provision them a machine. You want to put some controls around it, you know, put some bounds on what they're actually doing and connect it into your IT systems. Right. I don't hire anybody and just say, well, here's a laptop, go at it, good luck. You know, and same is true here for robots. And, you know, we are seeing, it's interesting. You mentioned, you know, UiPath is starting to come out with a service where we can, you know, provision the VM for you. We can run the robot essentially for you. And what we're seeing more and more of is sort of this hybrid approach for customers, because they want some things automated within their network, and then they also have automations that, you know, we're all using SaaS, so if it's only connecting to these SaaS platforms, why not put the robot itself as a SaaS platform? So yeah.
Perfect. So Kevin, you know, I don't know if you've ever sat on in one of my pitches or one of my conversations with folks. That's exactly. I mean, it's really interesting. I think, and it hits home very quickly. I think it'll be helpful for everyone else as well. That analogy of hiring a worker. Any RPA vendor, what they're selling you is a digital worker, right? And that's just a worker. Now, you have licenses to, or whatever model you used, you have licenses for X number of workers, just like any human worker you would hire. Your temp agency might say, or the recruiter that finds you might say, hey, I also have offices and I can also give you machines if you would like me to, right? But that doesn't mean that all your software will run in somebody else's network. So if you start thinking about it in those terms of, I'm hiring a worker and I need to give them the machines and I need to give them the credentials and I need to give them the applications and I need to treat it very much so like workers, it becomes a much easier thing to understand throughout the organization, I think, which is really interesting. And I'll talk about interesting ways people approach that. One of the other things that, as you saw the architecture, I think it's important to understand what components and what data is where. This is really important. And again, our purpose today was to make sure that everybody understands what these components are, where the data is, and different organizations, different industries will have different requirements for what can happen to data and what types of what types of security needs to apply to what things. So the three big portions of it, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of every single product and component that UiPath has, but the three main ones that you always talk about is the studio, whether it be the studio that the developer uses to develop an automation, or the Studio X component, which the citizen developer uses to develop their automation. It's a studio. It's a development environment. It's an IDE for those in in IT. They understand what IDEs are, but basically it's the place where you go in and you develop your automation, configure it, basically a sequence of actions, and give it the parameters that it needs in order to branch out, and so on and so forth. So that's where the development IDE comes in. Usually the development IDE sits on a machine that the developer uses. Usually they use test versions of applications underneath, and the code that they generate is generally integrated with some sorts of source code version control system. And I say this is generally because you can do it without, but just like you wouldn't write code without actually doing source code control, we would highly recommend that you don't try to write automations without doing source code control. However, UiPath actually has it built into their platform. So even if you didn't want to do it, you automatically will get some level of source code control through environments and the version control that UiPath does. So that's your UiPath Studio, and it also has test logs, which is when the robots run, they log everything that they do. I am opening this application. I have gotten to this part in the application. I'm entering this data in this field, and developers love to log these things so they can test and say, okay, they got the right places and they got the right data, so on and so forth. Those are all local test logs that remain on the local machine. The orchestrator is your server component. To go back to the analogy of human workers, this is sort of the manager. A manager that doesn't necessarily do the work. It manages all the workers, but it doesn't do the work. So it can sit outside your network, it can sit inside your network, hence you can be on the cloud or inside. Because it doesn't do any work, it doesn't need access to any of your applications, it doesn't need access to any of your data, it doesn't need access to pretty much anything other than the workers. That's it. The only thing that it needs to communicate with is the workers, hence it needs to communicate with the robots, and the network routes that need to open are to the network, to the robots. What's in the orchestrator? Because it's a manager, it has the credentials. So the robots talk to the orchestrator continuously and say, I am here and I'm sitting on this machine. I'm simplifying it, and Kevin might be like, oh, there are different models on that, so don't hold me to it. But the general deployment model is, I am a robot, I'm sitting here, I'm on this machine, and I'm alive. That's all it's telling the orchestrator all the time. It just says, there's a heartbeat that says, I'm alive, I'm ready, and what I'm doing, I'm either idle or I'm doing something, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm not even available. So that's what the orchestrator does. Every time the orchestrator is the one that actually decides what needs to run where. So you create a schedule, or you have a trigger, whatever that initial trigger would be, either time-based or event-based trigger. The orchestrator decides that a particular process needs to be run based on certain rules, a particular robot, and says, robot XYZ, I want you to run this, and here. So the robot says, give me the credentials to log into the machine. It logs into the machine. It knows what it has to run, so on and so forth. So that's sort of, I'm simplifying it, and we can go into technical details of that, but that's pretty much how it happens internally. So the login credentials for the robot sit in the orchestrator, and you have the ability to retrieve it from a IAM system, CyberArk integrations built in, and Kevin could talk about other integrations as well. The other thing that the orchestrator gets is logs. It's no different than any other log that any other developer writes. When the developer says, I am doing something, you can very specifically log a set of a text, and that text could be anything. when that happens, that log also goes to Orchestrator. Now, there's ways to control what level of logs you want to go in there. You might say, hey, only give me errors and fatals. Don't give me debug and trace information, the verbose stuff, or info debug trace. So you have the ability to bifurcate based on the level, what information, what level of messages you want to go to the orchestrator versus some other logging mechanism.
Yeah,
So
I should
go ahead.
also mention, because this gets brought up all the time for us is, well, my robot is working on my most sensitive applications, right?
Absolutely.
We're dealing with finance. I want to know what it does. I want to be able to audit it, but I don't want numbers exposed to some IT person running my orchestrator. And we actually provide a mechanism for that. So you can actually take any log statement and say, I want to log the event, but I don't want to log the data. Even if I'm troubleshooting, I've got verbose logs running. I want to be able to audit it, but I don't want to have an audit problem by having sensitive data in the wrong place. So we provide that mechanism too.
Absolutely, and it's pretty cool. You can mark variables as private; they don't go anywhere. It's actually pretty cool the way it's done. So thank you so much, Kevin. That's
Yeah.
actually very helpful. And then so that's the other data that's in the orchestrator. Assets are, think of them as configuration items. These are, where's how many times should I retry something, or what is the path where I'd find a file, or what is the email address that I should send a particular notification to, so on and so forth. So assets, those are assets, and assets can be either numbers, text, Boolean. Another interesting type of asset is a credential asset, which is I need to log into my underlying, let's say, loan origination system. Just like, remember, think of it as a worker. They need to get an asset. They need to get a credential to log into the application that they need to go into. That's also within the assets, but they're stored in the database encrypted and can be retrieved from CyberArk or any other IAM. Kevin, you want to talk a little bit about the asset security in UiPath?
Sure. Yeah. So UiPath has taken a pretty strong approach around data security, right? All of our encryption throughout all of our products, if it's encrypted at rest, it's encrypted using AES 256. Just period. That's our default for everything. And we want to take the best in standard. It's good you mentioned CyberArk. I really like CyberArk. I actually talked to their team yesterday, but not every company uses CyberArk. We understand that. And so, the module within Orchestrator that integrates with CyberArk is actually completely customizable. So we offer CyberArk and Azure Key Vault out of the box for what we support. But there are other vendors out there like Thycotic and Beyond Trust and HashiCorp, all of which you can have a integration between Orchestrator and those platforms as well. And you will find that a bunch of those are also on our near-term roadmap, and you're going to see supported directly by UiPath pretty soon as well.
Perfect. And by the way, we've done integration with all the ones that you mentioned, Kevin. Very easily doable.
Yeah.
The next item that's on the list is queue and action items. So when work needs to be distributed, usually there's a robot that says, oh, now I see a file here. That file has, let's say, 5,000 rows, and all these 5,000 rows represent 5,000 transactions that need to be input into another system within the next 30 minutes, right? That means one worker isn't enough to be able to input all these transactions into the system. I need 10. The way you distribute that is to take each one of those transactions and actually put them on queue, and then tell 5-10 robots that go get the next item from the queue and process the transaction. And that's the queue portion of the data. So you can distribute anything that you would like. So I've had customers who wanted some encryption on it. We just put encrypted data on there, and then each robot knows to decrypt it using the key that they have, right? but you can decide what you want to put in that queue item. We've done things like you can just put the transaction ID and all of that on there, the whole transaction on there, or you could obfuscate it, or you could actually abstract it and have it somewhere else and just put a key on the queue item. So there are ways to make sure that what data goes in there. But generally speaking, that data is plain text on the database within the orchestrator. The developer is the one who decides what data you want to put on the queue in order for the transaction to be able to be done. The other two big things that are on the orchestrator are what I call the process execution instructions. You would liken them to your job aids or the document that contains how you process an invoice, for instance, right? That's it. It's the same security level as that, right? It's basically you go into this system, you click these buttons, you go into that system, you click those buttons, you validate this to that, and that's your code. That is the process execution instruction. It is in the form of a package, which is sort of which is zipped up bunch of files that represent the code that the robots understand to execute. No data is included here, unless somebody very silly thing to do. But it's pretty much code, right? You never have any data in the code. You never have any very specific data instructions in the code, right? The job schedules and triggers also live on the UiPath orchestrator, which is when to run a job, where to run the job, and what the triggers are to run the job. So if you think about the server component of it, and we get a lot of questions about it because of the cloud, right? Oh, I'm on the cloud. Is all my data exposed? Is all my applications exposed to the vendor's cloud? The answer is no, not really, right? There's only a few things there, and even when they are there, it's fairly secure. The last thing is the robot machine itself, which is the runtime environment. What's on there? The UiPath robot gets the code, which is the process code. The UiPath orchestrator pushes that code to the robot, and it also has a local history and log of what it was doing. Those are the two things, and this sits on a machine that has all the applications that you need. So I know I went through a lot of this, but I think it was important because a lot of times folks don't have an understanding of these three major components of RPA platforms, which leads to difficult conversations. So having said that, I'll remind everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A session. We have quite a few participants here, so I'm sure there are questions coming soon. Of course, there are a number of security risks out there that people worry about today, phishing and DDoSs and all sorts of. Kevin knows more of them than I do. I don't do this for a living. But as me and Kevin were talking about this, we think that these are the most common ones that come up in conversation with CISOs and IT folks under RPA are sort of these concerns, right? One, data breach, data going out somewhere, right? That's number one. The malware, ransomware injection, and the unauthorized system access are sort of interrelated. Something somehow gets into my network, either injects it through one of the robot machines or somehow gets access to a system and does something nefarious with that system. And then the fourth one is kind of interesting. It's, these RPA platforms are also used as citizen development programs. So one of the big things that folks are worried about are shadow IT. So
yeah,
Kevin, you want to give some color on these things on what?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I love a lot of these because most of them all stem from sort of a single point, which is I have this software, it's doing great things, but I don't feel I have the visibility into it that I should, right? Or I don't know what it's doing. And what I find fascinating a lot of times when I talk to security professionals about this is there's this assumption that I have an understanding of what all my users are doing first off, right? And that somehow I'm going to have less visibility for robots. I think all of these kind of go along that theme, but for data breaches, look, a lot of these are just the scary things that keep CISOs up at night, right? Where is my data? How am I preventing it from going out? How am I managing secrets to make sure that nobody can get a hold of it, to get access to my data, right? When we're talking about automation and the ability to do nearly anything with a robot, then it gets sort of concerning where secrets may be stored or where data is being stored, right? Because part of RPA is actually being able to empower regular users, business users who are not necessarily developers or trained to write code, to automate part of their job, make their job easier. So one of those concerns is, well, they may stick data in some place they shouldn't. And we can get into that a little bit more. I generally find that, if I do a task 1,000 times as part of my regular job in a year, then I pretty well know where I'm supposed to stick things and where I'm not. What I don't necessarily know is, well, how the platform works. And that's kind of sort of where we get IT involved and sort of make sure that we understand the guardrails, right? I think ransomware, malware injection is on everybody's mind. We see it in the news all the time. Someone got hit by a ransomware breach. They didn't take proper precautions. Now they're locked down and they're facing a payment to some shadowy figure off in a country that we're not aware of, right? This is for RPA. Really, it's not any bigger of a concern than other IT systems.
Absolutely.
But it's there, right? And it's a big scary thing that we hear about a lot in the news, and so we do want to talk about it. And really, this comes down to robots are going to be accessing things potentially without human involvement. So if we don't put safeguards around how they pick up files or say access emails or websites or these sort of things, then we have a concern that there's no human checking that file. Now, I say that knowing full well a robot can spot a phishing email a lot better than I can, right? I may not recognize an email that it's from UiPath with 2 T's.com, right? But a robot would. So there are things to take into account there. And of course, unauthorized system access is a big one, because when we start talking about automation, there's always a concern in identity architecture that I could potentially give somebody more access than they have inherently by giving them the ability to run something, right? Run some piece of IT, right? So, and this comes up a lot with developers as well, where we have to have developers work alongside the actual business user and owner. You talked about developers working off of test applications, right? Makes a lot of sense, because if I'm automating something in my finance department, my HR department, I don't want the developer to go and pull down everybody's salary information, or what our company bank account info looks like. So there is a risk there that we have to manage. And lastly, shadow IT. I think we kind of talked about this already, but this gets brought up to me all the time. And I think it really stems from the numerous RPA or automation-like vendors and applications that are out there now. When I interview people, a lot of times they will tell me, "Oh yeah, I've used some RPA. It was a browser-based extension that I just installed and ran, and pulled some things from Twitter for me or Salesforce." And I was like, And that, when you hear that being called RPA, right, or automation, or you hear about some of these applications that get thrown in for free, that do RPA, you do kind of have a risk of shadow IT here.
Absolutely.
You have a concern that my users are going off, they're building something. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it does. I may not even know, what the program they're using is. And so as an IT department, that affects the stability of my environment, my end machines. And as a CISO, I look at this and go, well, I no longer know what's installed on the user's machine, where data's flowing in and out, what visibility I have into the programs they're running. There's a lot of potential concerns there. So it is a risk, especially for if you're not looking at an enterprise RPA platform, that your users can end up creating workflows that you don't know what's going on, and you no longer have a clear distinction of what IT systems are connecting to others. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. A couple of things that I'd like to give in our webinars, just pointed, very pragmatic advice to all our listeners, right? So as you were talking, I was going through in my head and like, oh, all right, there are these 4 things, and people are going to ask these questions. So the how at least from our perspective in UiPath, having done multiple implementations, the things that that put these concerns to sort of ease. Again, remember when people talk about data breach, right? The machines that data is on are no different than the machines that you have people working on. Hence, it's not, you're not adding to the surface area of attack, right? It's the same thing. It's the same type of machine. As long as you put the same controls that you put on humans on those machines, you're at least just as safe as humans are, right? So the data breach is not as big a deal because you can control what goes on the server side, and usually the servers are residing in the same sort of data centers and under the same security regime as the rest of your environment. So if somebody gets that far in, I don't think the Orchestrator server is the one that you need to worry about being breached. All right, there's multiple layers, even if the server is breached, to actually be able to get to anything of use other than the logs, which you can control, right? Again, it also goes for, so data breaches are in my opinion, I look at it from a, have I just increased the surface area? By default, by adding another server, you have, but it's no different than adding any other application. It's not like you're even in the cloud, you're in Azure. If you're using Office 365, you're already out in the cloud, and it's somebody has blessed that, and so it's, again, from a surface area perspective, I don't think you're increasing it that much. What do you think, Kevin?
No, I think it's a great point. And it speaks to something I hear all the time, which, now that I have this robot, it's almost seems to users who haven't dealt with RPA a lot that, installing this it's going to be standalone, and it's going to be separate from all my IT controls. When you hit it on the head, when really all my endpoint protection that I've already included, all my EDRs, all my, anti-malware, all the global policy controls that I put in place for a user, well, they apply for these robots working too. That's actually one of the good things is our software works just like a user on a machine. Allows us to integrate a lot more, also allows us to take advantage of all of the security and policy that you've already put in place. So.
On the other 2 things, one of the interesting things that, I read all these things, and Kevin, you're a security guy, so I'm sure you know more data about this, database evidence on this than I do. But from what I always hear, malware and ransomware most times is injected into an organization because somebody somewhere clicked on something, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Some person clicked on a link, some person got an email, some person went to a website. In an enterprise, I think it is much more likely that a human causes that type of stuff than a robot does, because my robot inbox could get all the emails in the world about an account in Wells Fargo that has an overdrawn something, right? But if it's not from the right email address, with the right text, in the right format, with a specific set of rules that it's trying to do. By the way, it's not designed to click on links. It says, when an email comes from here, go to the Wells Fargo website and then go there. So the risks are extremely low. And in fact, robots don't write down their passwords under the desk or on a sticky note and paste it over there, or write it in a plain text file and say, here are all my logins for all the state websites that I need to go to file the tax returns and so on and so forth. Those credentials are extremely guarded, if you may, either through integration through the third-party IAM or just the pure encryption behind layers and layers of firewalls in the data store of the actual Orchestrator. So I think malware ransomware injection, you're kind of safe, and you can say, again, these are practical things that we talk about. Unauthorized system access, that's interesting. There is a full set of permissioning that goes along with who has access to what within these platforms. I think the bottom two, I will say, are pretty interesting. I think when we started, I talked about the macros and access and sort of the automations that were built into 3270 emulators, for instance. Succeed Hummingbird had this beautiful thing I used to use it all the time.
Yeah.
Go fill out my test data in my mainframe application that I had to put in. My first job was a test engineer, and I had to put in 200 test cases every day into my systems. I made little automation to do it. But either way, the problem with all of those things were those are unmanaged, right? I come from capital markets. We had Excel macros galore. Everybody in finance is probably pulling out their hair like, oh, every one of my guys has a macro. The problem with those macros is you don't know when they're run. You don't know what's inside it until you get to the machine and actually open up the code and take a look at it. You don't know what it does. These 3 or 4 things, I think RPA's adoption in the enterprise was really due to the governance, the central governance that the orchestrator or the platform brought to automation, right? It is that one central place where you can go and say who has access to what. You can see what's being run, when it's being run, where it's being run, what is being accessed, and actually there's a lot of granular control that you can put to de-risk yourself from having that shadow IT. It's been done.
And we didn't touch on it too much, but if you look into the way Orchestra is actually managed, the way the role-based access controls and the sort of organizational structures are set up, it mimics a very familiar paradigm, and that's Active Directory, or any LDAP for that matter. Yep. We have, it's multi-tenant. We have folders that function exactly like organizational units. This is a paradigm that's been around for a long time. And we modeled it because it made a lot of sense to us. And if I look back at UiPath, 7 years ago, right? We were selling sort of Studio initially, getting RPA off the ground. And then, we started to have customers who were yelling at us once they got going. And it's because their IT teams came along and said, what are you doing, right?
More debt.
Exactly, and
technical debt.
We looked at it and said, okay, what are all of the pieces that an IT team needs to mimic what they're already doing, integrate into their enterprise IT, integrate into all the checks and balances, their change management, their controls, their policies to make this successful. And now we actually preach with our account managers, with our CSMs to say, with our partner teams, that the first thing you do is you get your proof of concept rolling, and then you go talk to IT to say, well, how do we design this for you to be successful? Yeah.
Good segue into the next thing, and Smita, I have your question here of workflow visibility. Definitely, we'll get to it when we get to question and answers. Hang on, just a few minutes. The answer is yes, the short answer. But if we look at some of the mitigations, right? I think we've talked about quite a few things, and Kevin, that was a good segue because I think that conversation after the POC, you guys are on the vendor side, so you do that POC, you've already convinced the customer, then they contact us and say, hey, we just got UiPath, right? Can we just get going? And to be very honest, I think what we do, and this is really, really important to do up front, which I've seen programs not be successful when this is not done. So establish a governance framework. I put that up front, but what I mean by that is at least know what you're going to do. And the best way to do that is to get, at this point, it's easier to get people in the market who have already done it before, right? 5 years ago, it was difficult to find somebody who knows a good governance framework for RPA, right? There was only a few people out there who had done this, but now you talk to your partner, vendor, whoever that is. Kevin can point you to resources within UiPath. He'll give you a good operating model and all of that. They have the AOM, right? But quickly establish a governance framework that says how are credentialing going to be happening? And to be very honest, I'll tell you guys, if you haven't done it yet, it's not a long exercise. It can be done very quickly. Most of the things that you need to establish the governance framework are already in your organization. You just need to repurpose them and say, we do this for this, and document it so that when the audit comes, you actually have something to show them that says, because you're doing them now, this is how we credential our bots. This is how we request a review of something. This is how we have, we request robot credentials for applications that are not AD, SSL, right? Whatever that is. So for us, Kevin, once you're done with the POC, before we start our engagement, especially on new implementations, there are two meetings that we have. One is with the IT infrastructure folks to actually go through the infrastructure. The second one is security and compliance, right? Yeah. The slides I actually gave you are out of that slide deck that we go through. The first two slides that are out of that security and compliance slide deck. We go through, here are the different components. What are your concerns? Both in terms of IT security as well as compliance and audit, right? How long do you want to keep the logs? What type of data do you want to keep the logs? From a security perspective, what zones should these components go in? Once it's different, the answer is always different. It's not like one size fits all for everyone, right? As Kevin said, you have a SaaS application that's publicly available, don't need to be on the VPN for it, and you need to do it all the time. You could have a dummy machine out in Azure and just run your things, right? But you have an internal application that does, compensation or bank statements for your transactions for your business. You probably need something inside your network or something that deals with PII or medical data that needs to be HIPAA compliant, things like that. The important thing is having that security review. And the last one is talk to your RPA vendor and I'll have Kevin rattle off some of the verifications that they have, some of the certifications that they have, Veracode and ISO and so on and so forth. But I think that's also very important. Kevin, your thoughts on these mitigations?
Yeah, so I like to hear that, one of the first things you do is go talk to the IT department, talk to the security. I think it's really important. And I think establishing governance is right up there. Too many times we see customers come in and say, well, we're buying software, we're going to take it in. Oh, we got to develop a whole new process for how we deal with this, right? And you're exactly right. Is typically, especially established organizations or enterprise customers, they already have something in place for, well, how do I write a standard operating procedure? Get it approved. Who actually runs it? What what permissions do those people need? Who's doing oversight of those? Automation really isn't all that different than writing an SOP. It's just
Absolutely.
potentially being executed by a robot instead of a user. And that doesn't mean you have to fully hand it over to a robot either. A lot of times we get into sort of a hybrid automation where a user starts something, they kick off a robot, and then another user comes back and checks and verifies things. And setting these things up front are all great, because then I can tell my developers, hey, meet these process check marks, right? Make sure you go through a scanner of the workflow. You include log statements for these sort of activities so that we can audit it later. If you're hitting these systems or dealing with this data, do it on these machines. We'll set something up separate for you. And once you sort of set those guidelines, your users, your developers can go full speed, and they can start getting you that ROI and back. And I like the compliance and audit review. I have talked to probably easily 1,000 of our customers about security. And whenever I get into a customer that deals with a regulated industry, whether that be finance or healthcare or government, or even just a public company where they have to do reporting, they have Sarbanes-Oxley. They're always worried about this idea of auditing. How do I audit a robot? And every single time I tell them, well, go run an automation and go through a mock audit. And invariably, the first time they do it, they come back and they say, I have so much data on what my robots did when and under what user, and I can follow it all, and it's all right there. My SOX audit got 1,000 times easier. And it's like, you have more visibility because the robot tells you every time it starts a process, as opposed to a user who we forget sometimes. I know I do. Yeah.
Imagine somebody having to pick up a notebook every time they're doing it and say, I am just logging in. Oh, right. And then I just did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I'm done.
Exactly.
Which is what the robot does. The robot literally does just that. I am looking at this, and I'm going to be doing this, and this is when I started, this is when I ended. And by the way, here is an exact audit of all the decisions that I took and why.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so validating your RPA vendor, UiPath, we like to be humble, as we say. So we don't try and brag about ourselves too much. That being said, security is very, very important to us. We understand that regulated industries are going to use our software. Major enterprise customers are going to be using our software, and even your mom and pop shop, this could be vital to them. We want to make sure that our software is secure out of the box. And not only that, that we give you all of the options to connect our software into your security stack, into your IT stack, so you can take advantage of all the good practices that you already have in play. So yeah, our cloud, we've gone through SOC 2 Type 2. We just released our first HIPAA attestations. We're working on FedRAMP at the moment, and you'll see on a 6-month cycle, we'll just be putting out new certifications, new audit reports, and these will just keep coming. We're very committed to it. We as a company probably release a major feature or a product every 2 months now, which is a massive, growth cycle.
Absolutely.
But that's also why we have a 6-month audit cycle now, where you'll see a lot of other vendors, they go full year, or maybe they don't. Maybe they just have, a certification that's static. And we do 6 months so we can add those new services every single time and keep expanding our scope. And so, I won't talk about every certification thing we have in there, but happy to answer any questions around our security software development lifecycle and our audit program.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kevin. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Folks, our email addresses are right there. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask it now, or feel free to send out an email to either one of us. You can find us wherever you found the registration link for this webinar. I'm sure if you were here, you know how to get in touch with us. But Kevin, I really appreciate it. We value our partnership, and thank you so much for giving us your time today and having this chat with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's great to chat and connect with one of our partners.
Perfect. Jamie, we'll get back to your question. Actually, I'll pass it along to Kevin, and we'll get back to you on the applicability of JFrog for UiPath projects. Have a good one, Kevin.
Thanks. Have a good one, Ahmed.
Bye-bye.